Well, my name is Juliana Nykolaiszyn with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Friday, May 15th, 2009, and I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, interviewing Judge Linda Morrissey. This interview is being conducted as part of the Inductees of the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame. Linda Morrissey was inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame in 2003. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, it's really an honor that you would be interested enough to gather all of this information. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. We'd like to begin by learning a little bit more about you. If you could talk about where you grew up in your early life.
Okay. I was born in Washington, D.C. with a twin sister, Lori. We came to Wagner County to a farm when I was about a year old, I guess. And I lived there until I started first grade. In fact, we did not go to kindergarten, my twin sister and I. We just went straight to first grade. And then we had to move into town, the nearby town, which was Haskell. Thereafter, we moved to Tulsa, and we continued to spend a great deal of time on the farm with our grandmother, but we went to school in Tulsa, where our parents lived. And we stayed in Tulsa until we completed high school and then on to college.
Wow, so lots of chores on the farm growing up?
Yes, although not a typical working farm. That era for the farm had sort of passed at that point, and there were tenant farmers who grew things like soybeans and wheat on the land, but we didn't have cattle or chickens after I got older. Now, when I was young, we did have chickens, and we were right out there with our grandmother collecting the eggs and feeding the chickens and so on. And, a real kind of Rebecca story farm kind of experience. And we also had a huge vegetable garden that we tended and collected the vegetables from in the spring and summer. So to that extent, it was like a traditional farm, but it wasn't a working farm in that we relied on the money from the farm to support ourselves.
Okay. And were your schools when you were younger really big or small? I would assume in Tulsa they were bigger.
They were bigger in Tulsa. In Haskell, when we went to first grade in Haskell, I think there were maybe 25 or 30 children in our first grade class. When we came to Tulsa, we were at a much larger school where there was more than one section of second grade at that point, and therefore a lot more children. It was definitely an urban school. It was in downtown Tulsa, in a very urban environment. The playground was asphalt, as a matter of fact, and it was very difficult for us to adjust to moving to a city school after having gone to this small school in a small rural community where we started first grade. So I think we managed to survive, but we always returned to the farm as soon as we could every Friday, and we would stay until Sunday night, and we spent all of our summers on the farm. So the farm continued to be our anchor, and it was an idyllic kind of existence down there. For example, the farm has a rock house on it surrounded by a white wooden fence. And across the front of that native rock house, there is a screen porch that spans the width of the house. We had 3 iron bed frames up on the front porch, and we slept out there on that front porch with our grandmother, listening to the night sounds. And there was a pond just very close so we could hear the frogs. It was just idyllic, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful setting.
So, what did you like to do for fun growing up?
Well, I loved horses. I had a horse named Princess, and so I spent a lot of time on those country roads around the farm riding my horse Princess with some of the other young kids who lived in neighboring farms. We would ride, in fact, down this dirt road over to Stone Bluff. You may have heard of Stone Bluff. There are several businesses in Stone Bluff now, so it's reasonably well known, at least in this part of Oklahoma. And back then, it was just a tiny little grocery store, spot on the road. We would go on these adventures riding to Stone Bluff on those country roads, and it would be a day-long adventure to get there and then return to the farm, all grimy and dusty and tired. And blissfully happy after having gone on this great adventure. So that's what we spent a lot of our summer days doing, riding horses around the country.
So back in school, favorite subjects?
I loved math. And I guess I must have had some aptitude in it because one tends to like those subjects that one excels in. So I enjoyed history in addition to math. I love geometry, for example, another math subject. I loved English, like diagramming sentences. Back in the day, we diagrammed sentences to learn the parts of the sentence and the sentence structure and so on. It was more like a game to me. So I guess those would be the subjects that I enjoyed the most.
So growing up, what did you aspire to be? What did you think, boy, that would be a great thing to become?
My mother was a teacher, and she taught in a neighboring community, Coweta. So, of course, I guess I grew up anticipating that I would be a teacher. And in fact, my twin sister did as well. We both got teaching degrees. We then continued and each got counseling degrees, anticipating that we would spend our professional careers in the public school setting. But while I was at OSU actually getting my master's degree, I had the opportunity to serve on the Academic Appeals Board. And I found the process fascinating of people submitting information and advocating, students that is, and advocating and then adjudicating and making decisions about whether or not a grade would be changed or the applicant would receive some relief from the Academic Appeals Board. That really triggered my interest in law and advocacy. And so that spring I applied. I took the LSAT and then applied to law school at OU. So that really was the point at which I kind of veered off course and jumped track from pursuing a career in teaching to pursuing a career in the law.
So, in talking with lawyers and judges, everybody has a different perception of law school.
Yes.
How was law school for you?
Law school was very difficult for me, although in a good way, because it was very academically challenging. And as is true for most law students, I came to that experience having pretty comfortably made very good grades, all through school, and was really stunned when I didn't make, what I expected my first semester of law school. I mean, I did okay, but it wasn't straight A's, which was a real shock to my system. And a lot of law students experience that kind of disappointment after having experienced the ability to earn A's in all their classes theretofore. So it was tough, but it was challenging, and it was just very rewarding to immerse myself in a different discipline and learn the law, the various bodies of law that law students are schooled in.
So after law school, lots of jobs, everybody's knocking down your door.
I graduated from law school in 1980. And at that time, the oil business was still booming, but the opportunity for one to work in law firms, for example, was not as great as we all hoped. I did go to work for a law firm as soon as I graduated from law school for a short while, and I was delighted to have been offered a job. So I was thrilled to have a job. Some of my classmates would laughingly describe papering their bathroom wall with rejection letters, and I got my fair share of those too, believe me. But I was fortunate enough to get a job, And then I had another opportunity to move to an oil company called City Service. And so I guess it would have been the very end of 80 or the first part of 1981, I went to work for City Service Oil Company. And I found that fascinating. And again, that event in my life directed the course of the next phase of my life when I spent my years as an oil and gas lawyer, primarily real estate and oil and gas.
And you did that for how long?
Let's see. I guess I was an oil and gas lawyer and a real estate lawyer for about a decade. And then, and incidentally, during that decade, the oil industry sort of cratered and we all scraped to survive, but we did. But as we got toward the end of the 80s, it really became hopeless. The oil industry, well, I guess a barrel of oil went down to, I think, below $10 a barrel at one point. And now people are complaining that it's in the $50 a barrel range after having gone up to almost $150 a barrel. So it was just no longer, the oil companies could no longer search for and produce oil. It just wasn't economically viable. And I then had the opportunity to go to work for the Resolution Trust Corporation. And it was, they say history repeats itself. Well, back then in the early 90s, our economy and particularly the banking industry was going through the same sort of turmoil and adjustments that we are now. And banks were failing at record rates. So the Resolution Trust Corporation was created by the federal government to identify banks that were unstable and then either support those banks in becoming stable or take the banks down. That was our terminology, and then sell off the assets or perhaps sell the bank to other people in the banking industry. So I spent about a year doing that at the Resolution Trust Corporation. Then, as luck would have it, they decided to close their Tulsa office. So I had an opportunity to go to work at the Court of Civil Appeals here in Tulsa for Justice Boudreaux. At the time, he was a judge on the Court of Civil Appeals. He ultimately went on to the Supreme Court. But I had the opportunity to work for Judge Boudreaux as a staff attorney at the Court of Civil Appeals for 3 years. And again, another fascinating experience, which allowed me to look at the law from the perspective of a 360-degree analysis. That is, we at that point would look at the cases that had gone through the district court system. In many instances, there had been an adjudication as a result of a jury trial, and then one party or the other would appeal the decision of the jury or the decision of the court, perhaps, and those appeals then would be considered by the staff attorneys for these appellate judges. So I got to sit sort of in an ivory tower and conduct research and write memorandum opinions and study these cases with a lot of detail and consideration that is only possible at that appellate level when you have the luxury of that kind of time. Now that I'm in the district court level, which is back a stage, I realize that the district court judges just don't have that luxury of being able to pore over these decisions in that kind of a sterile sort of atmosphere where we can look at all the potential cases and issues and rulings and interpretations of the cases and so on. So after I was at the Court of Civil Appeals for 3 years, I applied for a position here in the district court as a special judge. The special judges are sort of the entry-level judges in the district level. And the special judges typically preside over things like family dockets, domestic violence dockets, preliminary criminal procedures like preliminary hearings and so on, small claims, that sort of thing. So I applied for a job as a special judge and was very fortunate to be selected as a special judge in 1995, and I've been on the bench ever since. I did ultimately run for and become a district judge, but I've been on the bench since 1995, and it's just been a great experience, tremendously rewarding, just an experience that I can't think of a situation that would have been more gratifying and satisfying than the job I've had since 1995.
At what point did you say, "Hey, I think I want to be a judge"?
Good question, and that certainly would have been while I was at the Court of Civil Appeals, looking at the work of other judges and lawyers, and putting myself in the position of those judges and lawyers. And you'd find yourself reading transcripts and thinking, well, why didn't the judge do this, or why did the judge do that? And I could do that. And I guess the ability to look at it at that stage, to sort of look back like you're reading a history book of what had transpired to bring the case to that point at the appellate level, I was able to experience vicariously what the judge and lawyers did at the trial court level, and I became confident that I could do that. Although when I had first become licensed back in 1980, I was terrified of the court, absolutely terrified of this courthouse, terrified of going into a courtroom. And I avoided it. As I told you, I was an oil and gas lawyer and a real estate lawyer, which meant I never had to go to court. I never had to advocate in open court. One time I recall I was doing a little bit of probate, and I was supposed to get a will admitted to probate, which is about the easiest, most non-threatening procedure one can do as a lawyer in a courtroom. But I sat there in the courtroom watching the other cases on the docket and watching the lawyers stand up and go through this little very simple process of getting a will admitted into probate. And I just became more and more anxious. And I finally decided, I can't do this. I'm going to make a fool of myself. I cannot do this. And so I got up, I left the courtroom. I tracked my husband down, who is a lawyer, and I begged him, and I said, please, he happened to be here in the courthouse because he is a litigator and was at the time. And I begged him to come back to the courtroom that I was, where, my case was pending, and get this will admitted into probate. Well, he had been down here for some matter that didn't require a formal appearance. It was something that would occur in chambers, for example, where we are right now. And so he didn't have a coat and tie on. He just had slacks and a shirt on. But I guess for the sake of marital harmony, he agreed to do it. So he came to the courtroom, and when the case was called, he stepped up and went through the process of getting this will admitted to probate, which is truly the simplest thing one can do, I think, in the practice of law in a courtroom. And when it was over, it just takes about 5 minutes, the judge said, Mr. Nix, approach the bench. So my husband walked up to the bench, and the judge said, Mr. Nix, we have a requirement here in this courthouse that lawyers wear coats and ties if they're going to appear in open court. Don't let that happen again. Well, poor John, he was considerate enough not to expose me for having gotten him into the predicament in the first place. But anyway, so that was my one foray into trial work back in the early 1980s. It's interesting, Juliana, that now, fast forward 29 years later, I spent years in the probate court as the presiding judge of the probate docket, and have gone through as a judge 100 different procedures where we admit wills to probate. So it's just, I think it's kind of a testament about how we limit ourselves by our own fears and lack of confidence, and really a lack of a willingness to just forge ahead. I now call it just pushing through the fog and trying something that's outside our comfort zone, and giving ourselves the gift of being able to achieve something that is outside our comfort zone. Usually we can achieve it. We just limit ourselves. So that's kind of a little illustration of that. I think that adage that we can accomplish more than we believe we can if we will just believe in ourselves and allow ourselves to try.
Well, I'd like to, now that we're talking about your time on the bench, I'd like to talk a little bit about drug court.
Okay.
Tell me about drug court.
I love drug court. One of my passions, I guess, in the as a judge, in 1980, no, I guess it would have been 97. I had the good fortune of being assigned to preside over this new concept called drug court. Now, there had been a judge on the docket for a year before me, I believe, and he was reassigned to another docket. I was a special judge at the time, and the presiding judge assigned me to the drug court docket. Till that point, I had never been exposed to criminal law, to any type of criminal law, certainly not to drug-related cases. But I did have this kind of social work attitude and mentality about the kind of work I was doing at the time in family court. And I did have a counseling degree. And so these drug court cases were the types of cases that were not punitive. They were not designed to be punitive. Rather, they were designed to support and educate and encourage and nurture people who were charged with nonviolent drug-related offenses to help them become clean and sober and help them to commit to a life of sobriety. So I had the good fortune of being assigned this drug court docket, and I just saw so much potential with the people that I worked with who were assigned to drug court. They were all charged with felonies that were drug-related, like possession of a controlled drug. Sometimes it was just some sort of theft-related crime or knowingly concealing stolen property, but the underlying cause of their criminal activity was a drug addiction. So they could opt in to this drug court program that's non-punitive. And the procedure allowed these participants in the drug court program to say, hey, I have a drug problem. I want to deal with my drug problem. I just need some help. Will you help me? And they had to agree to be very committed to the process, which was a process requiring a lot of time and effort on their part to attend 12-step programs, to go to treatment, sometimes inpatient, sometimes outpatient, to appear in court, to become gainfully employed, and so on, and subject themselves to a great deal of supervision. We had officers who went out to their homes, who just do random visits to their homes, and so on. So there was a lot of accountability to the court, and that really enabled those that wanted to take advantage of the program. Most of them did, and most of them were successful, to experience of 18 months to 24 months in this controlled environment where they were committed to a sober lifestyle. And then at the end of that procedure, they had relearned some life skills. They had learned how to get through days without resorting to using drugs. They had learned about the consequences of using drugs. They had learned about the effects of their drug usage on their loved ones. I'll never forget one young man who came in one morning in May after Mother's Day, the Sunday before, and when we drug tested him, he was hot. He had used drugs over the weekend, and I began to inquire of him, how did that happen? What happened? He said that he and his mother had celebrated Mother's Day by sharing a marijuana cigarette. I mean, that was just his life experiences to that point. That's what had been modeled for him by at least his mom. That's what he saw as just a normal, ordinary thing to do. Although at that point he knew he shouldn't, he still didn't have the internal fortitude to decline to use drugs when offered. that young man ultimately graduated from the program. And what I believe, Juliana, is that he then went on to model drug-free behaviors to his own family, to his own children, and to those people whose lives he influences. That is the beauty of drug court. It is an intervention that allows people to change not only their own lives and to become productive members of society. It reduces the propensity to reoffend and reenter the criminal justice system, which counterparts who don't go through the drug court program do at a rate of like 60%. It's called recidivism, and 60% of those people will come back into the criminal justice system after they've been charged with a drug-related crime. Predictably, the drug court participants, in contrast, don't. Typically, it's unusual for drug court participants to reoffend once they get clean and sober and establish a life of sobriety. And so they model that behavior to the next generation. It's just a great intervention, and it's a way to change the way society at large and the criminal justice system in particular manages these drug offenders.
I also like how you also used it as an outreach.
I did because, as I said, I saw it as a real opportunity to affect those people that were not in drug court, the family members and so on. But I also saw it as an opportunity to try to influence and impact young people who were at that stage in their life where they would very likely be placed in the position of choosing whether or not to use drugs. And I wanted those young people to know the other side of the story, the consequences of what happens to a person who chooses to use drugs. So I contacted local school districts, and I just took the show on the road. I literally packed up drug court, and I went out to schools around the greater Tulsa area, and we had drug court in the schools. And we would have our participants give sort of testimonials to the student body and talk about how they originally came to use drugs and the effect that it had on their life and how improved their life was as a result of choosing to be clean and sober. We showed the students pictures of these people when they would come into the program, and typically we always did take pictures of them, and typically they would be very disheveled, emaciated, hollow-eyed, someone who was not in a good shape at all. And you could tell that just by looking at them, just looking at their physique and their face and so on. And then we would show in not only a picture, but in many instances, a real life version of this person 24 months later, 18 or 24 months later, where they're clear-eyed and they're they look healthy and they're vibrant and they're enthusiastic about life. So, of course, the message to these students was, when I am offered the opportunity to use drugs, I'm going to decide not to, because I know what's going to happen to me if I make the wrong decision to use drugs. And I hope that it did have that impact. I certainly got a lot of really good feedback for those programs that we took to these school systems around the Tulsa area.
Now, you also heard a lot about a lot of cases regarding domestic violence.
Yes, I did. And that is an area of law that is a real concern for me. Not because I've ever been a victim of domestic violence, because I have not, but my loved ones, some of my loved ones have, and I also have observed how debilitating emotionally and physically and financially domestic violence can be. So when I first became a special judge and I was asked what I would like to do, I said I would like to preside over a domestic violence docket. And one of my colleagues said, if you keep telling people that, they're going to think you've got a loose screw. They're going to think something's wrong with you. You're not stable. And I said, I do, though. I think I can make a difference, and I have a passion for those areas, and I would like to preside over a domestic violence docket. So they let me, and we set up a standalone, single-issue docket, which was the domestic violence docket. And that's all I did for at least a year, maybe longer than that. All I did was deal with domestic violence cases. I don't think I have a loose screw, and I found it to be very rewarding. And I think we did accomplish a lot by managing those cases and those families in a proactive way so that we could protect, we could educate, we could empower, and hopefully change the course of lives. And I want to say that not only did we work with the victims of domestic violence, we also took it a step further and worked with the perpetrators of domestic violence to educate them about the consequences of their decision and educate them about other coping skills and decision making and so on, so that they hopefully in the future would make other decisions about the way they attempted to control another person's life. I mean, hopefully they're not going to use violence or force to control another person as a result of the education that they've learned, or at least that was our ambition. And they told us that it did make a difference for them. So I hope it did.
And then, continuing on, divorce and child custody.
Yes. After I left the domestic violence docket, I was assigned to a family court docket. And I like to call it a family court docket because it's a process that is typically a divorce case, but it truly involves the whole family. And I'm not just talking about the family unit that is going through a divorce. I'm talking about related family members and even friends to some extent. But I believed that the process was very destructive, and it was unnecessarily destructive, and it exacerbated the conflict within family units, I believed. So I had the opportunity to work with 4 other women. And some of those women are in the Hall of Fame, like Norma Eagleton, I believe. We worked for literally years in a little group. We'd meet like once a week, maybe once a month, during some phases. And we cobbled together, by looking at systems all around the United States, a plan for supporting families as they were going through these very, very difficult proceedings or life experiences where the mother and father within the family unit were choosing not to maintain their relationship. Usually it was husbands and wives, but not always. Sometimes it's just there were paternity cases where the parties weren't married, but they had children. So anyway, we put together a thorough program for supporting these families as they were going through this process. And I remember one day we were sitting up in the office of Judge Shellcross. She was one of the women who worked with us. And we were trying to decide what we were going to call this program that we had put together. And I said, I think what we're doing is we are supporting families as they transition from one family unit to 2 family units, maybe more than 2 family units. But basically, they're going through a transition. And I think we should call this program Families in Transition, because that's what's happening. They're going through a transition. And if we can, from the very beginning, introduce them to the concept of families in transition, provide them with the skills and the knowledge and the understanding and the wisdom to know how to go through this transition in a positive way, in a way that will minimize the adverse effect to the children and to the parties. What a gift we'll give our community. I also believe that the cost of the litigation model was very debilitating to families financially. They were already compromised and crippled usually when they got to the divorce court, which I called family court. Once they finished, my goodness, they were really crippled financially in most cases. This Families in Transition program created an alternative and allowed the families to manage the way they would transition into two family units with the support of experts and professionals that weren't the adversary type professional like a lawyer. I mean, usually they would use lawyers, but we also wanted them to bring into the mix counselors, family therapists, and sometimes parenting coordinators to teach mom and dad how to work with their children and preserve relationships and so on. So we believed that we could support these families as they went through this transition in a way that would help them to work through it so that they would leave the process with a healthier frame of mind, and the children would not experience the really debilitating effects that divorce typically has on children. So I just feel great pride, I guess, that one thing I accomplished or have accomplished so far in my judicial career is being a part of bringing the Families in Transition program to Tulsa County. And it was unique to Oklahoma. There was not another Families in Transition program or a program like that in the state of Oklahoma when we implemented this in 1998. And as luck would have it, I was elected to a district judgeship in 1998. So I became chief of the family division in 1998. And that was when we actually implemented the Families in Transition program and provided all the forms which we had created and so on. Now, this small group of women that originally crafted the concept and brought the components of the program together took the program that we had put together to a much larger committee of lawyers and other judges and consumers and so on and mental health professionals, and they put their spin on it. So ultimately, we came out with a document that is the Families in Transition program that provides all the steps in the process that families go through when they are deciding not to continue as a single family unit.
And I'm sure you've heard a lot of good stories emerging from that, just like drug court.
Yes. I had a mom tell me one time outside the courthouse, just out in some social situation, that she had been in a divorce case, and this is before Families in Transition. She had been in a divorce case, and she said, I sat in the back of the courtroom, and up at the bench where the judge sat was my lawyer and my soon-to-be ex-husband's lawyer. And the three of them stood up there in hushed tones. They talked about our children, our home, our assets, our relationship, our finances, and we weren't a part of it. We were sitting in the back of the courtroom. That is the litigation model. It's the lawyers and the judge making decisions about these families that will affect them for the rest of their lives. Mm-hmm. Make no mistake about it, for the rest of their lives. And she said she felt disenfranchised. She wasn't a part of this process, and yet it was having this dramatic, direct effect on her. The Families in Transition model is just the opposite. The parties whose lives are affected by the fragmentation of the family are the drivers. They are the ones that are making decisions. They are an integral part of the whole decision-making process and where the child will go to school, where the child will live primarily, and so on. A very different approach that I think is much healthier. It's much less expensive. It doesn't engender the kind of conflict and sometimes hatred that the litigation model does. It doesn't force parents to get up on the witness stand and, as they say, air their dirty laundry and tell things that were never intended to be heard by people outside the privacy of their own home. So I just think it's a much healthier and more effective process for our families in this community.
So after family court and drug court, what was next?
Well, another thing I got to implement when I was the chief of family that, again, I take great pride in and has been tremendously gratifying over my career is another standalone specialized docket. And this was called the Child Support Enforcement Docket. I smile because I think that docket perhaps has done as much good for moms and dads in this community as any other docket. It's still viable. I mean, there is still a child support enforcement docket. And the way I came to create this docket and craft this system was when I was on the domestic violence docket, I noticed that very often the issue of child support was one of the primary igniters for creating conflict between moms and dads. And under the old system, to bring a dispute about whether or not child support had been paid, the party that was entitled to receive child support would have to come to court, file a contempt proceeding, hire a lawyer, get it set on the court's docket. There would be a hearing that would called an arraignment. Very often it would be passed over and over again. I mean, these contempt cases that were spawned by child support obligations, sometimes they would stretch over years, literally years. And that is not an exaggeration. Sometimes the people who were owed child support, the moms and dads who were owed child support, they would have to file multiple contempt actions to get any relief at all. And very often it became apparent that it cost them more in attorney fees to collect the child support than they stood to collect in child support. I mean, the fallacy is so apparent. So I went to the presiding judge and I said, I have an idea. I would like to create a standalone docket to adjudicate child support collection cases. And I would call it the Child Support Enforcement Docket. Because I said, I believe I can put a system in place that will allow people to get relief very quickly. And I think once our community becomes aware of this process and adjusts to the process, it will be sort of a self-enforcing device or mechanism for motivating people to pay child support if they owe child support. So I wrote this program out, and the judge allowed me to, it was Judge Sellers, he allowed me to set up this child support enforcement docket. And I said, I'll take all the contempt cases, all of them, from all the other family judges. I will do the contempt cases that are filed on their dockets. So that's what I did. And I had a very predictable process for the way these cases would move through the child support enforcement docket system. At the first appearance, which is called the arraignment, the party who is owed the child support is required by court order, to show up in court. And they have the opportunity at that time to enter a plea of guilty or to not paying child support or not guilty. And if they say they're not guilty, which 99% of them did, then we would set that matter for trial. But I didn't set it for trial in 6 months or 4 months. I set it for trial in 30 days or less. And that's what I told them at the arraignment docket. I made a speech, and I would say to everybody there, this is a expedited procedure for ensuring that child support is properly paid. And this is what's going to happen. Today, there will be an arraignment. In 30 days or less, there will be a trial, unless you decide to plead. And I said, I'm going to give you a trial date in 30 days or less, let's say 30 days. And on that day that you're set for trial, and you have to come back, because if you don't come back, the sheriff will come out and arrest you. On that day, one of 3 things will happen, only one of 3 things. I'm going to tell you right now what those 3 things are. Number 1, you're going to come in here and admit that you haven't paid child support, and you're going to plead guilty to not paying child support. and you're going to fill out a form admitting that you haven't paid child support, and you're going to enter into a payment plan that will obligate you to pay child support, not only your current support, but get your arrearage taken care of as well. Or the party that is owed child support, if they are, they're going to come in here in 30 days and they're going to say, all the child support's been paid, so I dismiss my case. That's the ideal situation, right? Or we will have a trial, and that trial can either be to a judge, me, or it will be to a jury. That's your choice. You can have a jury trial, or you can have a judge try the case. If at the conclusion of that trial, the trier of fact, either the jury or me, the judge, finds that by clear and convincing evidence that there has been a willful failure to pay child support, then you're going to be found guilty. And I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. Right then, that day, at the end of the trial, I don't care if it's at midnight, this is what's going to happen if you're found guilty after the trial. You're going to go to jail. You're going to go to jail for 6 months. And that's flat time. You don't earn good time. It's flat time. You will do 6 months in the Tulsa County Jail. You're going to be fined $500. You are going to have any business, professional, drivers, recreational, occupational license that you hold suspended. You're also going to be ordered to pay all of the attorney fees that the moving party has incurred in forcing you to do what you already should have been doing. And I said, frankly, very often the attorney fees are more than the child support. So you're going to pay your own attorney fees, and you're going to pay the attorney fees of the moving party. Now, when you go to jail, you'll have the opportunity to sort of buy your way out of jail by paying all of these costs and fees and child support and interest, 10% interest, that has accrued and that will be assessed against you. But unless you pay it all, you're going to stay in jail. Well, at first, they didn't believe me. They just didn't believe me. I mean, it had never happened to my knowledge around here. So the first 2 or 3 months, we'd set cases for trial, and as I had told them, if a person was found guilty, they went to jail. Now, mysteriously, usually, almost always, they came up with the money once they went to jail. A lot of times, they would go ahead and pay the child support that was owed, and so the case would be dismissed. We would not have a trial. Very often, they would enter into a plea agreement. Come back in 30 days, they enter into a plea, and they would say, let's say they owed $10,000. On the plea form, they would say, yes, I admit I owe $10,000, we'll say, in child support. And I'm going to pay it. And I'm going to pay it at the rate of $1,000 a month. And I will also keep my current child support paid up. I also required them to pay the attorney fees that the moving party had incurred in bringing this contempt case to force the person who's obligated to pay child support to pay the child support. And, I'd say to these people, it's just so much easier if you'll just pay your child support. It's so much cheaper if you'll just pay your child support. So anyway, if they chose that third option of entering into a plea agreement when they came back to trial, that was fine. I mean, I didn't want them to go to jail. I just wanted them to pay their child support. So let's say they agreed to, in writing and orally, to pay the arrearage and to keep their current child support paid. Then I'd say, okay, you're going to come back to court in, let's say, 2 months. You're ordered to come back to court in 2 months. There's that accountability to the court. So you've got to have the accountability factor there. If in 2 months when you come back to court, I'm going to tell you right now what's going to happen. I'm going to be sitting up here on this bench like I am right now. And when I call your case, I'm going to ask one and only one question. Now, I'm going to tell you right now what that question is. The question is, are you in compliance with your plea agreement and your payment plan? Have you paid as you promised that you would pay? And I said, and I'm only going to allow you to respond with a 1-syllable answer. And it's one of 2 words. I want you to know right now what those 2 words are. It's either yes or no. If it's yes, and the moving party agrees that you paid your child support, then I'm going to send you away and have you come back 2 or 3 months later, and we're going to keep doing that until you get this arrearage pay. And as long as you pay not only the child support, but all the accrued interest, all of the cost, all of the attorney fees, then you will not go to jail. If, in contrast, your one-syllable answer to that one question I'm going to ask you is no, then I'm going to tell you to go have a seat over in the jury box by my deputy, and you're going to be in the custody of the Tulsa County Sheriff. Then, once I got these dockets rolling, the very first thing I would do when I had an arraignment docket, when all these people were showing up for the first time that had just been cited for contempt. So, there might be 50 people sitting out there in the gallery. They're showing up for court for the first time, and then all the other people that are on a payment plan, they're in court too on the same day. So the very first thing I would do is ask that I'd call their case, the people that were coming back for the review, and I'd ask them that one question I told them I was going to ask them. I always did exactly what I said I was going to do so that it would be predictable. They would know what was going to happen. I'd ask my question, and they would answer. If the answer was no, I would usually get this response. No. Remember, it's a one-syllable answer. Is your answer yes or no? Well, no, I'm not going to listen to excuses. I need to know if your answer is yes or no. And they'd ultimately say no, maybe. And so I'd set them over there in the jury box. Now, after the docket was over, I would talk to those people and find out why they hadn't paid. I mean, if they'd been in the hospital or something, that's one thing. But usually they just not made it a priority. They made their car payments and they bought their cigarettes and they made all these other choices, but they just chose not to pay child support. But I wanted the people that were on the docket for the first time to know what was going to happen. And it had this wonderful self-enforcing effect I predicted. So after about 6 months, people just started paying their child support because they knew what was going to happen if they didn't. And I mean, within that first year and a half, I think by the end of that second year, we had generated over $2 million in child support. I mean, it was unbelievable. And people were getting in and out of the system in 30 days. Mm-hmm. And they were getting their child. I mean, I had the people who had custody of the children and were supposed to be getting the child support. I had them write some compelling letters and come and tell me some compelling stories about the difference it had made in the lives of their children for their children to get child support finally after all these years. One lady I remember said, I've been trying to get child support for 18 years. 18 years. And she said he would never pay child support. And I'd bring him to court and they'd say, now do better, and come back and tell me that you paid your child support in 6 months. And he'd come back and he hadn't paid. He had some excuse, and they'd tell him to come back 6 months later and to do better. She said, finally, with the rocket docket, that's what it was fondly called, the rocket docket, because it went so fast, he paid his child support, and he got all of his child support paid, and it was a lot of money. So.
Well, it's great that you could look at the system, see a problem, find a way to fix it, and then you see the results.
Right. That's the best part, seeing the results. Yes.
I could see how it could be stretched out over months, but if you say 30 days,
yeah,
I mean, that kind of puts the fear in you.
Yeah.
Like, oh, something's going to happen now.
Right.
Is the rocket docket still in place?
Yes, it's still in place. Yes, it is.
Well, that's great too. Yeah. The longevity of
Yes. I guess we implemented that docket maybe in 97. I can't remember exactly when but it is still in place. It's still fondly referred to as the rocket docket, and I think it's still effective in forcing people to pay the child support that they're obligated to pay. And that's the whole idea.
Well, something else you were very key and instrumental in working on was the community sentencing program.
Yes. You're bringing so many wonderful memories to mind. I was assigned a felony criminal docket in 2000 or 2001, something like that. And it was very apparent to not only me, but to the legislators, the lawmakers, that the way we had been dealing with nonviolent, now I'm talking about nonviolent, the way we had been dealing with nonviolent felony offenders was very expensive, very counterproductive, and very ineffective. In that, we would incarcerate them. We had this exploding prison population. It was a revolving door. We would put them in prison for a few months or maybe a few years. They'd get out. They'd reoffend 60% of the time. They'd come right back to through the criminal justice system doors. And again, there was no intervention. There was no opportunity to jump off of that drug-infested kind of lifestyle that they had, for whatever reason, adopted. So the legislature and legislators enacted a law called the Community Sentencing Law. And I can't take credit for the law. I didn't write the law. But I did have the very good fortune of implementing the law when it was enacted. Because when it was enacted by the legislature, I was on a felony docket, and most of my cases were drug-related cases. So I wrote, with the help of a judicial intern named Vicki Brandt, a bench book, which is what judges use to assist them when they are trying to apply a body of law that might be unfamiliar to them. So I wrote with Miss Brandt this bench book, this thick book that was designed to help the judges around the whole state of Oklahoma adopt and utilize this wonderful new law that was more socially responsible than the old lock them up and throw away the key model. It was kind of like drug court, those same sort of social engineering sort of procedures that exposed people to alternative lifestyles that were not the drug kind of lifestyle, drug-riddled lifestyle that they had led theretofore. And I think it has been reasonably successful. And I know over the years that they've tweaked it, and it's still a body of legislation that can be utilized in the criminal courts to manage non-violent offenders so that they stay in the community, they get treatment, they get counseling, they get job training. And that was another thing about the child support enforcement docket I forgot to mention, that it was a part of the docket that I was really proud of. Some of those people, I remember one woman in particular said she couldn't pay child support because she didn't have a job. So after she was found guilty and put in jail, I arranged for her to participate in this program that was called a day release program, where they would go out into the community and work in the community, and then they would come back to jail at night. And all but something like $3 a day of the money they earned every day went toward their child support obligation. And then when they got it paid in full, of course, they got out of jail. That particular woman, I recall, got a job as a result of that program. And even after she got her child support paid and she got out of jail, she stayed on that job. And she told me for the first time in her life she was gainfully employed. And she told me that with a big smile on her face. I mean, she took great pride in that accomplishment, that she was able to get a job and hold it down. So anyway.
All right. So we were talking about some of your earlier dockets.
Yes.
So after the family court and drug court and the community sentencing program and all of those good things, what was your next docket?
Then I had an opportunity to take on a probate docket, which is yet another discipline, specialized discipline. And So I guess, these years are just running together. But I don't know, maybe about 2003 or so, when the judge who had been on that probate docket for about 18 years retired, I got to take that probate docket, and I loved it. Again, it was one of those dockets where I could work with families and in a sort of nurturing way while they were going through a difficult part of life, which was the loss of a loved one. I also, as a part of that docket, did adoptions, and then for a while I did guardianships as well. But again, those were cases involving sensitive kind of social issues that I have a real passion for and that I find very gratifying. I guess one reason I went into teaching and got a counseling degree was because of this yearning to support people and assist people as they when they find themselves in need of that kind of assistance. And the probate docket sort of lent itself to meeting that need that I have. So it's just a fabulous experience. I was on that docket for maybe 3 or 4 years, I guess. And then I had an opportunity again when a judge left the civil docket. I had an opportunity to take on the civil docket. And these cases on this particular docket are usually disputes involving like breach of contract or personal injury or wrongful death, those kinds of cases. It's very different than the types of cases I have handled heretofore, but it's enjoyable for me to become immersed in a different body of law, which is civil procedure and the discovery code and the evidence code and so on. So I'm thoroughly enjoying this docket as well.
Is there a pecking order to the dockets?
Well, some might argue that there is. I can't say for me, I would consider one docket preferable to another. I have tried to avail myself of opportunities to take on new bodies of law and new types of cases and preside over as many different types of dockets as I could for my judicial career. And I, so far, have been able to do that. And now, I'm on one of the few dockets that I haven't presided over, which is a civil docket. I've been here for a year, thoroughly enjoy it. The only other docket, specialized docket, is a juvenile docket. It's out in a totally separate building. Haven't done that yet. And who knows whether or not my career will make that opportunity available. But for right now, I'm very happy with the docket I have.
Well, I'd like to just take a step back for a second.
Okay.
And have you tell me a little bit about Lucille.
Oh. Well, when I was in law school, a friend of mine named Ann Powers was a social worker for DHS. And I remember one day she told me that she had gone out to meet with a woman who somehow was involved in the DHS system. She must have received DHS services. And Ann described this little lady that was living in a one-room garage apartment. She was bedfast because she was crippled with arthritis. She could not walk. Her little hands were all shriveled up like this, and her feet were shriveled up. She lived alone in this little garage apartment. She did have people who would come by and bring food to her. I mean, can you imagine not being able to get out of bed? She had a little old, pitiful tiny black and white television that got very poor reception with the rabbit ears. And my friend Ann noticed that this garage apartment just seemed to be infested with roaches and was unsanitary. But one thing she told me about Lucille that really endeared her to me before I even met her, and that was that Lucille had long gray hair. And Anne described how she would brush her hair and then very carefully put her hair in braids. And then she would take the braids and intertwine them on top of her head. And on top of the braid, she would put a little red ribbon. So here was this poor little lady living in this roach-infested, nasty, one-room apartment, confined to her bed, passing her days with nothing to entertain her but some books from the library, thank goodness for those, and this little television that had terrible reception. And so I said, Anne, I want to meet Lucille. Can I? So she arranged for me to go and meet Lucille. And boy, I walked in and my heart melted because she was just as Anne described. That little red bow was perched on top of her head. And I just became attached to her. You know, I had been, my grandmother had always been a huge part of my life. I lived on the farm with her for the first 7 years of my life. And so I had this affinity for elderly people anyway. And Lucille was inspiring to me because here she lived. She was destined to this life that most people would find almost unbearable. And yet she chose to do what she could to make life good for herself, and right down to grooming herself and putting this little red bow on top of her head. So I became friends with her, and I would go see her periodically. And it turned out that Lucille had no family. She had no children. She had no siblings. She had, of course, no parents at that point. She had 2 or 3 friends that would call her because they were disabled too. But the only human contact she had was with caregivers. And some of those people were really wonderful, and some of them were not so wonderful. So I became very attached to Lucille. By that time, my grandmother had passed away. And then I graduated from law school, and so I was leaving Norman to come to Tulsa where I had a job. And it just broke my heart to leave Lucille behind. So my twin sister Lori Pettis, we have a lot of the same philosophies in life, I guess, and the same ambitions about trying to leave this world better than we found it. And so I enlisted her to help me, and together, the two of us put together this little plan to move Lucille to Tulsa, where we both were. And we got our husbands to get a couple of pickup trucks, borrow a couple of pickup trucks, and go to Oklahoma City, load up what few pitiful little belongings Lucille had, which included, by the way, a color television set, because I had arranged to get her a color television set. So she had her color television set. It's quite a prize for her. And we moved her to Tulsa in this little apartment that we had found, which was a nice, tidy, clean little apartment down here on 15th Street. Got her all set up. She was just as happy as she could be. My twin sister Lori was very involved in attending to Lucille and spending time with her and so on. And about, 3 or 4 weeks into her stay there, she told us that the landlord had come by. And when the landlord discovered how disabled she was and the fact that she was bedfast, the landlord said that she was going to have to move out because he didn't want the liability of her being in his apartment. So we went to work trying to find alternative housing for her, which we ultimately did, and moved her over there, got her all settled in, and she was there for quite some time. I remember one caregiver she had stole Lucille's Social Security check after she'd gotten it cashed. She had someone cash it for her, and after she had gotten it cashed, this lady took her money. We were just so, we knew it had to be this particular caregiver. We were just so incensed by that my sister Lori decided that we were going to sue that lady in small claims. Now, Lori also has a law degree, but is not any more comfortable in litigation than I was at the time. But still, she wanted to hold that woman accountable for taking Lucille's money. So she filed a small claims case. And on the day of the hearing, we loaded Lucille up on this gurney, if you can imagine that. Because she couldn't even travel in a wheelchair. She had no muscular control. She was so crippled by arthritis. And brought her down here to the courthouse. And Lori, my twin sister Lori, actually did this. Brought her to the courthouse. And when the case was called, she wheeled Lucille up, in front of the judge, and she made her argument and asked Lucille questions about who had taken her money and so on. And the lady that was accused of having taken it, which we think did, showed up, and she just said, "I didn't take it. No, I didn't." Well, there was no corroborating evidence. There was no eyewitness. There was no confession. There was nothing to substantiate. It was just a swearing match. So the judge ruled against Lucille. He did not find this woman had taken Lucille's money. So, we lost the case, but we tried. And anyway, so Lucille stayed here until she passed away, which was, 2-3 years later, perhaps. And she spent her last days over here in this hospital, Tulsa Regional, which is not too far. I just live a few blocks from there. So, I got to go see her over there. And it was just a very rewarding experience for me because it gave me the opportunity to connect with someone who had taken her life's circumstances and made the best of it and found joy in the life that she had and the meager existence she experienced. She managed to find some way to enjoy life and to feel satisfaction with life. And I to this day, greatly admire Lucille for the way she chose to live her life. And it was a conscious choice, of course. So it was a real gift to me, a blessing from God to me and to my sister that we had the opportunity to know Lucille for at least just a short time. I remember when we were moving her back from Oklahoma City, we were on the Turner Turnpike and we looked like the Beverly Hillbillies. We had 2 pickup trucks, my husband, John Nix, and my sister's husband. And we had those trucks loaded down with her few personal possessions. And my sister had eaten something and got food poisoning. She started experiencing the symptoms of what was apparent food poisoning. So we had to pull off the road and we got out. And by that time, I started getting sick, and pretty soon all 4 of us were sick. And we were just lying, out on the side of the Turner Turnpike, sick as dogs. Poor little Lucille was with us. She was the only one that didn't get sick. Anyway, it was quite an experience. But
Well, you seem to bring this level of passion to everything you do, be it helping others or, as a judge or helping the community. So that's really nice to see.
Thank you. I try.
Also, jumping back just a little bit, you spoke a little about going to college and going to law school. Did you always think you would go to school?
Oh yes, there was not ever any consideration of the fact that all of my mother's children would go to college. She went to college and graduated with a teaching degree, and she was also a journalist in Washington, D.C. for a while before she married. Now, my husband my dad had not gone to college. He only went to the 9th grade. But he was a pretty smart guy, I'm told. He died when I was 13, so I didn't know him real well over the duration of my life. But my mother believed in education firmly. And the circumstances of my childhood were such that our financial resources were very, very limited. Especially after we moved to Tulsa, we weren't living in grandmother's house anymore. We all there were 5 children, and my mother and my father, and we lived on a pretty meager income stream. And mother used to always say to us, the ticket out of poverty is through education. So all of you must get your education. You must stay in school until you get your education. So we all have. The 3 of the girls ended up going through law school. My older sister, Kathleen Duncan, has almost a PhD. In addition to, she has a law degree. My twin has a law degree. And my little sister, Jeannie, has a degree in finance. So we all went on to college. My older brother, Joe, who's the smartest one of all of us, went to Vietnam when he was 18 years old, I believe. And he was one of the casualties of Vietnam because he suffered a breakdown there. And so when he came back to this country, he was never able to function completely independently again. And to this day isn't. But he's a wonderful, wonderful, kind, loving man, and very smart. But, he has to live with the effects of having been in a war zone in Vietnam back in the 60s. So he's the only one that doesn't have an education. And all of us have imparted that same commitment to education that my mother, Imogene is her name, Imogene Payne Morrissey, instilled in us. So my 3 children have never even considered the possibility of not going on to college when they finish high school. I mean, high school is just a baby step toward completing their education.
Well, we learn the tools we need in our career from many different places.
Yes.
Sometimes we learn it in the classroom, and
Right.
sometimes we learn it elsewhere. Where are some of the places that have you learned your tools for sitting on the bench?
Oh, wow. Well, first of all, at the feet of my grandmother, Ella Payne. Kind, compassionate, gentle, generous woman who came from Arkansas, married when she was 16, moved to Oklahoma to this farm in the, the late teens, and worked hard throughout her life, very hard. But she always made time for things that she valued. For example, she always went to church. She was a very strong Christian woman. She always found a way to get to church, and if she didn't have transportation, she would literally hitchhike from the country to the church in Haskell that she attended. And she was a kind person and made an effort to identify people who were in need for whatever reason, whether it was clothing or food or housing, whatever the need was. If she recognized it and she had an eye for that sort of thing, then she set about trying to meet that need. People sometimes would come down there to the farm, and the farm is about halfway between Haskell and Coweta. So sometimes people would come to her and say, I'm hungry. I can't feed my family. So she would go to her orchard that she developed and tended and get fruit for her trees, and to her garden and get vegetables, and to her hen house and get eggs and sometimes chickens to feed the people. She always said, feed the hungry, clothe the poor. She really believed in those biblical principles, and she practiced those principles. She and my grandfather bought this farm down there in Wagner County, and then during the Depression, they were unable to pay their bills, and so she used to tell the story about the banker that held the mortgage coming to the farm, driving up to the farm, and she went out to meet him. I guess they had come to recognize his vehicle or something. So she went out to meet him. Excuse me, I'm sorry. And she said, if you will just give me a few more days, I will sell my chickens to make the payment. And that's what she did. She sold all of her chickens and she made the payment. And then grandfather was able to make, Jim Payne, he was able to somehow make money and keep their mortgage paid. And so they didn't lose the farm as a result. So anyway, they were very hardworking, salt of the earth, good, wise, kind people. And she instilled all of those values in me, those spiritual values, the work ethic, I hope a sense of compassion. And my mother had many of those same values. Now, mother was very, very committed to education, as I've already said, and she insisted that all of us pursue our education in advanced degrees. She was a teacher. Some of the time we were growing up, some of the time she did substitute teaching, and some of the time she just tended to us. But she insisted that all of us, she always say, hold your head high, girls. You know, we may be poor, but we have respect, and we respect each other, and we're going to respect ourselves. And so she instilled those same values in us about believing in ourselves and doing what was within our ability, wherever we were at any given point. And I'm talking about we in a generic kind of sense, to meet the needs of those around us. A belief that my mother held firm. If she saw someone lying on the street, she didn't just keep driving on by. She would stop and attend to them and assist them in whatever way she could. So those values of attending to other people, identifying the needs of other people, meeting the needs of other people, all of which is a part of what I do now every day. And it's what I've been doing for a long time, in part, were instilled in me by my parents. My father was a very, very hard worker. As I said, I didn't know him nearly as well as I wish I could have, because he died when I was so young. But people always told me that he was a very good man, and that he was one that a person could always call on for assistance if they needed it, and so on. So I think he must have had the same sort of commitments to that sort of humanitarian type lifestyle that my mother did, and my grandmother. Incidentally, my mother had a brother named Wesley Payne. He farmed down there with my grandmother, and his wife, Ada, my aunt, and Wesley, they were a very significant part of our raising as well, of our upbringing, because Wesley did a little bit better than my mother did financially, and so he shared his resources with us. I mean, they would buy clothes for us and shoes for us, and sometimes they'd take us on little trips. And again, it was just that family commitment to all binding together and working together to help each other be healthy and stable and have a good life. So it was a real family sort of value, I guess, that we all held. And just as they were there for us, we have tried to be there for our aunt and uncle and other members of our family as they've grown into old age and then passed on.
Well, that's just great to see, and hopefully that trend will continue.
I hope so. Boy, I sure want to try to instill that in my kids. And it's such a balance, because it's a funny thing how you want to give your children everything that you didn't have. You're going to find that out when you have children. You want your children to have everything you didn't have, and yet you want to instill in them a sense of appreciation and compassion, and you want them to be able to connect with the needs of other people. And so, sometimes you kind of have to step back and try to bring some balance back into giving them too much. Like my little girl this summer has applied to be a counselor at the NDA camp. Those are the kinds of experiences that I want her to have, so she will have that enriching experience of helping someone else. I mean, it's so hugely rewarding, as everyone knows, yourself included, that lends a hand to someone else. It is so richly rewarding to the giver. So,
Well, tell me a couple of your biggest highlights within your career. I always say, tell me your biggest highlight, but then everybody's like, well, I have multiple. So you can share a few. It's okay.
Okay, now we're talking about my career.
About your career.
I'm going to answer that in terms of my career, because I would have to say that my career has not been the highlight of my life. But within my career, I think the highlight so far would be the Child Support Enforcement Docket and Families in Transition. Those two programs that I feel like I had a big part in bringing to fruition. I, was a part of creating those programs and a part of implementing those programs, and then observing the very positive effects of those programs. So I would say being a judge and being a part of implementing those two programs would definitely be the highlight of my career so far.
And outside of your career?
And outside of my career, it would definitely be my family. I'm very blessed to have a wonderful, wonderful husband. And this is where I get emotional. And 3 wonderful children. They hold the strings to my heart because they're so precious. And I feel so blessed to have married the wonderful man I did. And I feel so blessed to have had 3 wonderful children. They brought me the most joy and the most pain, I guess, in my life so far. I'm sorry I'm getting emotional. I can't believe I am. But anyway, certainly outside my career, my family, my wonderful husband, my wonderful, wonderful children, Denver, Travis, and Savannah, and then my wonderful family of origin. I have a twin sister, Lori, who's angelic. I tell people that she's an angel here on the face of this earth. She is. And I have a wonderful older sister, Kathleen Duncan, and my little sister, Jeannie Morrissey, who is precious. She, in some ways, was more like a child to me than a sister. We still call her honey and baby because she was the baby of the family. And then my wonderful, kind, loving big brother, Joseph. So for sure, the best part of my life so far has been my family relationships.
Well, turning to the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame, you were inducted in 2003. When you were notified, what was going through your mind at that time?
It's like, you can remember where you were when world events occur. And I remember where I was. I had the probate docket at the time. I was sitting at my desk. And my phone was behind me as it is now, and they said I had a call, and I turned around and answered the phone, and they told me that I was being nominated. Well, I guess I'd been selected for the Women's Hall of Fame. I remember saying, I think you must have the wrong number. This is Linda Morrissey. And the lady said, yeah, we know you're, it was so out of the blue. I had no idea that I'd been nominated for it. I certainly, even if I'd known that, I wouldn't have in my wildest dreams believed that I would have been fortunate enough to have been selected for it. So, gosh, it was a moment of disbelief and a moment of humility and a moment of just ecstasy. You know, it was just thrilling to have gotten that award.
And did you attend the ceremony?
Oh, yes, I did. In fact, I have the certificate over my computer monitor, so I get to see it every day. And yes, I did attend. It happened that it was on March 27th, 2003, which was my 50th birthday. My twin sister was there. And, you know, I was so emotional that I only spoke for about 30 seconds. You know, we were allotted 5 minutes, and I had a 5-minute speech that I had rehearsed at length. But I was so emotional, I couldn't keep my composure. And so I just got up and read this little, very short poem that was just a tiny part of my speech. And I wasn't even able to wish my twin sister who was there in the audience happy birthday or say this is our 50th birthday. I just couldn't. I was too, I was euphoric, and it was just one of those moments that was so intense. I simply could not speak without losing my composure, as I did a few moments ago when I was talking about my husband and children. So I didn't want to make the audience uncomfortable by tearing up, you know, and I just, in the moment, decided to just, read this little poem, and that was it. But I was absolutely there. All my children were there. I remember my son, Denver, jumping up and down. It was, see, here I am getting emotional again, but it was a wonderful moment in my life.
Well, how do you feel that now women look at you as that role model?
Well, I love to teach to this day, and I do teach regularly, and I love to mentor young people. I am known as having more judicial interns than any of the other judges, and I get kidded about that because the other judges say I am greedy and I get all the interns, and I do get as many as I can. They help me tremendously, but I love teaching them, and I hope that I can be a role model or a mentor that conveys to young people, both men and women, the fact, I believe, that one can have a rewarding, fulfilling career and have a wonderful family life and home life. That's what I aspire to. You know, I used to tell my kids that I wanted to be the kind of mother that would cause them to believe they had a stay-at-home mom. I wanted to be so available to them that they would know the difference between a stay-at-home mom and a working mom. And likewise, I wanted to be the kind of lawyer and judge that one might describe as a full, someone who's donated or dedicated their life to that avocation, that had nothing else in their life except being a good judge or a good lawyer. So that those values I want to pass on to those young people that follow in my footsteps. I speak a lot about ethics, for example, and I go to the law school and I tell these law students, every moment of every day, you make one decision after another that builds your reputation. And it is one of the most valuable assets or commodities that you have. You can lose it in a split second of indiscretion or being dishonest. And it's not something that you can ever recover from fully. Once you compromise your ethics and your morals, it's not something from which one can fully recover ever over the course of their life. So I tell them to guard it and treasure it and protect it. And I tell them little stories about moments in time when, in a moment of indiscretion, as I say, someone did compromise their values or compromise their ethics and their reputation. So it's those kinds of values, work ethic, compassion, all of the things that I hope I am true to, and I hope I invest in everything I do. I want to pass on to the young people who will follow in my footsteps.
What does Oklahoma mean to you?
Oh, I love Oklahoma. I call it God's country. When I was in law school, I worked in California one summer, and I used to say, I'm from Oklahoma. I'm from God's country. There is not a single place on the face of this globe where I would want to be other than Oklahoma. I don't think there's a more wonderful place in the world. Not that I've traveled that widely, but I've been outside of the United States a few times, and I've certainly been around the United States some. This is just a wonderful, wonderful place to live. I feel so fortunate to live in Oklahoma. The people are the kind of people I want to be around. They're the kind of people that I want to influence my children. They're kind, good, loving, compassionate people. The weather, I love the weather. I love the way the weather changes. I love the fact that it's unpredictable. It's beautiful, particularly in the northeastern part of the state that I live in. It's beautiful. Even the western part of the state has its own kind of beauty. And there's such diversity in this state in terms of culture and in terms of topography, in terms of the people that inhabit our state. It's just a wonderful place to live. I would never, ever, ever want to live anywhere but Oklahoma.
So what's next on the agenda for you?
Oh, Juliana, I don't know. I will be eligible to retire in 6 or 7 years, something like that. And I don't know whether I will retire then. I love my work. I have such a fabulous opportunity to be a part of people's lives and in this world and this community. So I don't know whether I will retire when I'm eligible or not. If I do, it will only be to use whatever skill set I have in some other endeavor. I want to be a, quote, stay-at-home grandma for at least a portion of my next life, where I will be the kind of doting grandma that my grandmother was. She used to make side apple pies in her little kitchen there on the farm, and my twin sister Lori and I would be flanking her on both sides, rolling out the dough. And these were side apple pies from apples that she had harvested from her garden and from her orchard. And so I want to be that kind of grandma, that reads to my grandchildren and plays games with them and makes them feel like they are the most important creature on the face of the earth. I want to keep giving to my community somehow, some way. I don't know if, maybe in politics. I don't know really what the future will hold, but I do hope that I will continue to be able to make a contribution on some level as my life goes forward.
All right, so this is a good question, but
it's not going to make me cry again, right?
It may. It's always nice to kind of end on this question, but when history is written about you,
oh wow,
what would you like for it to say?
Gracious me. I want history to reflect on me as, first of all, a good mom, a wonderful mom, and a good and wonderful wife, a good sister and daughter and granddaughter. All those relationships, those are the most important parts of my life, my relationships with my family. I want history to be able to say that I made a difference in my community and that I had a positive effect on my community, that I continued throughout my life to use whatever skills or influence I had to help other people and to improve the lives of other people, to have a positive impact in my world in whatever little way I can. I want there to have been, I want there to be a history of having left a positive impact on my family and on the world around me, like on my children, for example. I want to instill in my children the values that I've talked about here today, like compassion and extending a hand to someone else and looking for opportunities to extend a hand. They're there. Sometimes we have to look for them. Sometimes we're buried in needs. But no matter, I hope that I can instill in my offspring, my children, that value to make a difference for other people, to be kind and compassionate, to be humble, to never ever reach a point where one might feel like they're superior to any other human, or that they're entitled to privileges that someone else might not be entitled to. So I guess that's what I would say. The kind of values that I pass on to those I can influence.
Well, we've covered a lot today.
Yes.
Kind of a nice wide stroke. Is there anything else you'd like to add that I have not asked you?
Well, one thing I will say to you is I love to quilt. That's kind of one of my hobbies, quilting and gardening. And grandmother was quite a gardener. She had beautiful flower gardens. And people would drive all the way out to our little country home from town to see her flower gardens. So to this day, I have flowers all the way around my home. I bet you already, here it is, the second week of May, I bet I put out 50 or 60 flats of bedding plants. And I couldn't even tell you how many rose bushes I have. And my sweet husband has fruit trees around. We live in downtown Tulsa, but he still has fruit trees in our yard. And so we're big into gardening, and I think that was a love that was instilled by my grandmother. And then I love quilting. She was also a quilter. And to me, quilts are works of art. They, I think of a quilt as something that just can envelop a person and make you feel safe and warm and nurtured. So I want, I guess I quilt with that ambition that I'm creating something tangible that will be that source of warmth and comfort and a sense of well-being to other people. Plus, they're works of art. So, and I love old things. As you can see, my office is filled with old relics. I guess that's my way to try to just hang on to history and eras that precede me. See if there's anything else I can think of. I know as soon as you walk out of here, I'll think, oh my goodness, I should have said so and so, because that's really important. I have wonderful friends that enrich my life, every day. Friends I think will be there for the rest of my life. I have a strong spiritual dimension that is personal and my own. I believe it is very important to respect the spiritual beliefs of other people and honor those, whatever those spiritual beliefs are. I certainly have very strong spiritual beliefs, and I endeavor to and believe that I should respect spiritual beliefs of others. And so it's a very private, personal part of my life for me. What else? I thought about something a few minutes ago, and it has escaped me now, but that's okay.
Do you still have some of Grandma's quilts?
I actually have one of my grandmother's quilts, and there are, my sisters and actually my cousin, who's also her granddaughter, Armetta, she's like my sister. She's wonderful, and her brothers Mark and Dale. I think they have some of Grandma's quilts. I hope they do, because it's just a part of our connection to our grandmother, who was such a huge influence for all of us, and continues, I think, to affect the way we live our own lives and the mark that we are creating and making here on this earth. So, there was one other thing I wanted to tell you about one of the dockets. I know what it was. Another thing that I have had the privilege of doing during my career is working on a women offender task force to try to understand why we here in Oklahoma, very often in Tulsa, Oklahoma, incarcerate more women per capita than any place in the world, any place on the globe. We, right here in this state, in this wonderful state I love so much, we put more women in prison per capita than any other single geographic community in the world. It's really inexplicable to me. And so for several years, I worked on a committee. I chaired a committee. I worked on the governor's task force as a designee of an individual appointed to that task force. And just here within the courthouse, we've endeavored to try to understand that fact and remedy that fact. We've made some progress, but my goodness, we have a long way to go. A long, long way to go. I think there has to be a more intelligent way to deal with people who are drug offenders. And most of these incarcerated women are drug offenders, or they're supporting someone's drug habit. They're usually nonviolent, and that's usually how they end up in the penal system, is because of underlying drug issues. And gosh, the social fallout on their children, their family, their own health, both physical and mental health, the cost associated with the consequences of incarcerating women on society at large, providing for their families, providing for their children, attending to their own physical and social and mental health needs. The cost is staggering. It's just not a very intelligent way to address the problem. So that, you talk about something I need to do in the future, that's certainly a project that I need to invest time in and future in, to try to at least begin to resolve that problem. So
that's definitely a problem in Oklahoma.
Yes.
If you could come up with a good system, boy, that would be great.
Yes. Yeah. And there has to be a way to do it. Mm-hmm. We just need to find out what that is.
Sure.
Hopefully we will.
I hope so. Well, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule today to meet with us. I do appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Juliana. It was really an honor to get to be interviewed and to be selected for the Women's Hall of Fame, and I appreciate your interest so much. I think this is a wonderful project. I would love to hear the interviews of the other women. So thank you.
Thank you.